Well, in the dispute about the downed Russian plane, President Obama is taking Turkey's side over Russia's.
Turkey, like every country, has a right to defend its territory and its airspace. I think it's very important right now for us to make sure that both the Russians and the Turks are talking to each other, find out exactly what happened, and take measures to discourage any kind of escalation.
For his view on how this event changes a global conversation, former State Department official Kristen Whiten is with me now. So, Kristen, this is the most serious clash between global powers, ones that are jostling, of course, the context here in this Middle Eastern conflict. What kind of fighting will undermine these international efforts to combat ISIS?
Well, I think the idea of a grand alliance between the United States and Russia, potentially Iran and Turkey against ISIS were always half-baked. After all, Russia will always find a way not to be helpful to us in the Middle East. They're not really there to confront ISIS. They're there to shore up Bashar al-Assad, to shore up the Syrian government. So this actually may be a clarifying moment. The Turks have really done us a favor on a number of levels. First of all, they've shown Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, what a real red line is, and that for them is crossing into their territory, also bombing ethnic Turkmen inside Syria, and just the other sort of expansionist moves that Russia is doing in the region. So coming up against, frankly, reality in the form of the Turkish military.
Okay, speaking of Russia, the defense ministry reporting that airstrikes are destroying more than 1,000 ISIS oil tankers. But, Kristen, a U.S. defense official told us earlier it would be nearly impossible to destroy that many tankers with Russia's kind of unguided bombs. So, to your point, is Putin lying?
I think that probably is an exaggeration. Certainly, I would trust our own Pentagon before I would trust a Russian military estimate. They have a well-established habit of doing more than just putting their best foot forward when it comes to talking about their success on the battlefield. But it is important to note, I think, that Russia, to the extent it is targeting ISIS or other radicals in Syria, is doing so with a lot fewer restrictions than our own forces. If you look at what the U.S.-led coalition, now a year and a half into this bombing campaign that has very little to show for it, the amount of restrictions and the small number of sorties we fly compared to what Russia has done. Russia just does not go to war with the army of lawyers that we have now saddled our own war fighters with. So I think 1,000 is a bit high, but I wouldn't be surprised if the damage they're doing is very considerable.
Now, President Obama did speak earlier about how he sees the U.S.'s success in hurting ISIS in Syria and Iraq. This is part of his statement.
We have squeezed their supply lines. We have empowered and armed local groups that are pushing against them, including most recently in Sinjar. We're providing training and assistance to the Iraqi government. We've seen some success, but the question now is how can we accelerate it?
So, Kristen, I heard what you said about the U.S. having to go to war with an army of lawyers, but what could the U.S. be doing better?
Well, we could, when we decide to go to war, just decide to do so with overwhelming force and to win. I'm not in favor of going into war with half-baked plans. And frankly, the safe zone people want in Syria sounds half-baked to me. But if we've decided it's time to kill ISIS, we should kill ISIS with overwhelming force. We don't need to turn the place into Beverly Hills. We don't really even need to build democracy. We could turn it over to Sunni tribesmen and get out. That's what actually the French do in Africa. They go in and they get out. But more important than what you do on the ground is in Syria is recognizing that this is a global contest. We're at war not just with ISIS, but with radical Islam and ideology, and learning to fight that just like we fought communism in the Cold War, not just with our army, not just with the CIA, but to fight an ideological fight. And if you notice, ISIS isn't just in Syria. It's in Paris now. It's in Belgium. It's in Egypt. It's in Libya. So taking a broader view, and when you decide to fight to win.
Well, and to your point, Christian, a lot of people saying that the recruitment is being done easily in Europe via social media, and there's this big outreach plan, which proves your point. I want to talk about larger consequences. It's something we alluded to earlier, but Marco Rubio, of course, presidential candidate, saying because Turkey is a NATO nation, the U.S. would be obligated to respond to the plane going down. Listen in.
It's important for us to be very clear that we will respond and defend Turkey if they come under assault from the Russians. Otherwise, the entire NATO alliance comes into question.
So what is the most worrying piece on this international chessboard to you?
It is somewhat worrying to see a NATO ally in direct combat, if you will, even if it's just one incident with Russia. I mean, during the Cold War, that would have actually, taken us to a higher defense condition level of readiness. And the other problem is Turkey is profoundly unhelpful in other way. They host the Muslim Brotherhood. They host Hamas. They have stoked the flames of hatred against Israel. They didn't let us send our 4th Infantry Division to war in Iraq. Regardless of what you think of that war, we should all agree that we want American troops to be safer. And Turkey, our ally, obstructed that. So it is a little bit irksome to have a so-so ally writing blank checks that with our signature, if you will, if you forgive the metaphor. So that is concerning, and this does have the potential to escalate. The upside, though, is that Turkey turned to the North Atlantic Council. They apparently believe in NATO. That's more than France did. France, after the Paris attacks, turned to Brussels, turned to the EU, and hasn't really done much other than sort of the usual orchestrating the usual diplomatic verbiage of, standing with France, or we stand together and we're up against these people. Turkey at least recognizes the role for a military, I think, more significantly.